Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 100 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Now, I have a very familiar face to many viewers tonight sitting alongside me, and of course, this is Mike Robinson. Good evening, Mike.
Evening, Ian.
And Mike, of course, is a very familiar face to regular viewers of UK column news, but not so much on Humanity versus Insanity, and that's primarily because Mike is normally the other side of the camera, sitting in the studio, actually producing each of the episodes. So, Mike, it's an absolute pleasure to have you this side of the camera.
Thanks, Ian.
And by the way, thank you so much for all your efforts in putting on these shows over the last 4 years, would you believe?
It is pretty unbelievable, but I mean, it's a pleasure. I always enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Well, so 100 episodes, I mean, it's say 4 years, and unfortunately over the past 12 months or so, we've slipped from weekly to probably not even monthly, primarily because it's about 1,000-mile round trip for me to get to the studio. But we've focused a lot over the last 4 years on the rising corporatist police state.
Yeah.
In fact, the first 3 episodes, I had your colleague Brian Gerrish with me, and we actually addressed the whole issue of police behaviour and the reframing of police. But have you seen a mirror to some extent between what we've been addressing on Humanity versus Insanity and what you're reporting on UK column news?
Absolutely, and it's getting more extreme. So Devon and Cornwall Police this week produced a nice little video that they pushed out explaining that they're going to be carrying submachine guns, basically.
In Devon and Cornwall?
Specifically at festive markets and other festive events. And I just, this is a psychological operation in a sense, because, I mean, what risk is there of any kind of Islamist terrorist event in Devon or Cornwall? The risk must be pretty low, but they feel it's appropriate to choose Christmas as the time to be pushing forward this. But we don't need to worry, it's for our own protection. Everything's all right. But, this is acclimatizing people to seeing guys with black uniforms and baseball caps carrying submachine guns.
Well, if my memory serves me correctly, there was a contrived event in Exeter some 2 or 3 years ago. But other than that, I mean, the closest Devon and Cornwall's come to serious crime, I think, was the murder of the young schoolgirl, Jeanette Tate, about 50 years ago.
Right. But it's now, of course, Devon, because we're starting to merge police districts, it's now Devon, Cornwall and Dorset as well. So, Poole and...
Oh my gosh, maybe it's Dorset that's the threat.
It could be.
Unbelievable. Anyway, we're going to come back and take a look at this rising police state and, of course, its association with the rise in corporatism in the UK. But it's been actually about 9 weeks, I think, now, since the last episode of Humanity versus Insanity. And immediately following the last episode, we had an event in London, which was this event here, Agenda 2040, the rush to transhumanism. And this was a full-day event in London at the Connaught Rooms. And I choose the Connaught Rooms very deliberately because the Connaught Rooms were once part of the Grand Lodge, the home of the Royal and Ancient Rite of Freemasonry. And the room that we use, the Cambrian Suite, is about as close as you can get to the Grand Lodge without actually walking through the front door.
Okay.
And people have asked, well, why do I do this? Well, it is actually deliberate to try and just maybe change the energy a little with the people that come along to alternative view events. Yeah. Now, you weren't able to make that event, but of course your colleague Brian Gerrish was one of the speakers. And we do actually now have, at long last, hot off the press, the DVDs from that day. So there are 4 DVDs in this box set. And there's Graham Downing, whose presentation was Transhumanism and the Rise of Interdimensional Artificial Intelligence. And actually the reason that the DVDs have taken a bit longer than we anticipated to come to market, as it were, was because Graham wanted to put in some additional material which has been added to his DVD. Patrick Henningson, an excellent presentation, Slaves on a Digital Plantation. And then Brian's presentation, very interesting, Thought, Leadership and the 10 Commandments. And, Brian's absolute fascination with where this agenda is emanating from.
Yeah.
And then finally, my own presentation, Is Humanity on the Brink of Extinction? Actually, the full title was Is Humanity as We Know It on the Brink of Extinction? So these DVDs, they're available from 3 websites, well, 2 right now, actually. They're either on mine, ianrcrane.com, and I believe they're also on ukcolumn.org.
As from tonight, they are, yes.
As from tonight. So if you want to get in quick for the first batch and get them before Christmas, take your pick, either ianrcrane.com or ukcolumn.org. And then as of tomorrow, they'll also be on alternativeview.co.uk. Now, 8.1 was an additional event, but of course, normally I have the annual conference, the AV, and of course, next year we have AV9. But you've pretty much been to everyone, or?
No, I've been to the last 3, and I was at 1 or 2 of the others that Brian was doing.
Okay,
but I wasn't staying overnight at those ones.
Okay.
So just the last 3 as a residential. But they are fantastic events.
Well, I didn't pay you to say that.
No, I know.
Well, I mean, they are unique, I think, and this is the whole point, really. They are unique in that being residential, all the speakers are effectively required. Part of the arrangement is that the speakers stay at the venue for the entire weekend and are available for informal discussion with all of the people who attend the event.
Right.
So have you found that to be the case?
Absolutely. And great opportunity to meet some people that, you just don't get to see face to face because you're bringing people in from the States and other places.
Well, and I must confess, I get frustrated when I'm at a conference and, the speaker walks on stage, does their 45 minutes or an hour or whatever, and then that's it. They're gone.
Yeah.
And if you had any questions, well, it's a bit unfortunate because they've gone. So here, at least, everybody does have that opportunity because they're available to speak to, during the meals. And of course, being residential, it takes away all of the problems of finding accommodation or finding places to eat during the event.
Yes, the only issue with the event is the lack of sleep. This is a positive thing, so it's not a problem.
Okay, well, next year it's on the bank holiday weekend by request of a lot of people. And actually, over half the tickets were sold before even the end of AV8. And actually, so many people took up the offer of the early bird tickets. It's given us a little bit of a minor problem. But we're going to make another 30 tickets available at the price, which hasn't changed actually for 4 years now. So there's another 30 tickets available at £150. And once those 30 tickets are sold, unfortunately, there will be relatively small increase in the price of the tickets. And then next year, we might try and balance the number of early bird tickets a little better than we perhaps did this year. But AV9 and AV10 will both be at the Horwood House Hotel. This is a stunning venue, about 70 miles north of London, not too far from Milton Keynes. And in fact, one of the aspects of the event is that we do run a free taxi shuttle from Milton Keynes Station to Horwood House Hotel. So there's a taxi shuttle that runs on the Friday afternoon and again on the Monday or Tuesday morning, depending on when people are leaving. So as is always the case, we will have our regular speakers, but the full list of speakers, I had my reasons for not revealing the full list too soon, primarily because of other people jumping on the proverbial bandwagon, as it were.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll make that list available in the not too distant future. So tickets are available from both my website, ianrcrane.com, and alternativeview.co.uk. And these are, say, unique events, 3 or 4 nights in the same venue with like-minded people, where you can talk pretty much about anything you want without running the risk of being labelled. So anyway, look forward to seeing some of you there. Now, humanity versus insanity. Let's come back to the subject in hand. The previous 99 episodes are actually not all on YouTube. Almost all are on YouTube, but if you want to look at the back catalogue, as it were, they're all, well, all but, I think, 3 freely available on the playlist, the Humanity vs. Insanity playlist. And one of the reasons that the 3 are not available is because of issues that the people who appeared on those programs have had in their personal lives. Primarily threats from employers, and particularly issues regarding alternative cancer therapies.
Right.
So it's a very sad situation, but of course it is still illegal in this country to claim that there is any alternative treatment for cancer under the 1939 Cancer Act than radio or chemotherapy. Very sad state of affairs. But anyway, right, to the issue in hand, the rising corporatist police state. Now, Mike, I think you covered this issue on UK Column News today. This is Juncker's, or the revelation that Juncker, when he was Prime Minister of Luxembourg, actually used the Secret Service to spy on his political opponents. Yes, and I mean, this is an historic thing, so this is going back to when he was Prime Minister of Luxembourg. But it's incredible how much corruption there is within national governments, and they get promotions. So he's obviously the President of the European Commission at the moment. Is he untouchable? Well, that remains to be seen. Well, I guess it depends what photographs he has. Well, indeed. I mean, obviously, if he's had the Secret Services chasing around, monitoring his opponents, then I'm sure he has some very interesting and very usable material. But the headline here was very interesting. This is from the Daily Mail. And of course, it's alluding to the suggestion that how outrageous it is that an ex-PM, or when he was Prime Minister, he used the Secret Service, to spy on his own citizens. Well, I mean, this is very interesting, Ian, because yesterday as well, in the press, we had the exposure from The Guardian and the ICIJ, the Bureau of Investigative Journalists, that the British security services have been placing people in campaign groups. So we've heard this about the police. This is now an investigation into security services activity. So, it's not security services activity. It's effectively privatized security services, because these are ex-security services staff that are now working for private corporations. And whereas in the past we've heard stories about the police infiltrating and sometimes getting campaigners pregnant and marrying them and this kind of stuff, we've now got private security firms employing ex-police, ex-special forces, ex-security services personnel to get involved in campaign groups, infiltrate those groups and spy on those groups. Well, but this is a privatization of that, of that sort of, this type of Juncker's type corruption. And that's a new thing, I think. I think you're right. And in fact, Brian Gerrish this evening gave me a copy of this book. Oh. And there you can see it on screen. It's called Undercover, The True Story of Britain's Secret Police. And this is written by 2 journalists, Rob Evans and Paul Lewis. In fact, Rob Evans is actually the journalist who has made some of these revelations in The Guardian earlier this week. But let's just have a look at what some of the reviews on this book say. This was an undercover operation so secret that some of our most senior police officers had no idea it existed. The job of the clandestine unit was to monitor British subversives, environmental activists, anti-racist groups, and animal rights campaigners. And goes on. Police stole the identities of dead people to create fake passports, driving licenses, and bank accounts. They then went deep undercover for years, inventing whole new lives so they could live incognito among the people they were spying on. They used sex, intimate relationships, and drugs to build their credibility. They betrayed friends, deceived lovers, even fathered children. And their operations continue today. Undercover reveals the truth about the secret police operations, the emotional turmoil, the psychological challenges, and the human cost of a lifetime of deception, and asks whether such tactics can be justified. And then the article that you referred to from The Guardian earlier this week, and I believe Rob Evans, one of the authors of this book, was actually a contributor to this article. Surveillance firms spied on campaign groups for big companies. So activists, or basically anybody who has the audacity to show dissent in what is supposedly a democracy, runs the risk of being monitored by not only the police, but also monitored by the private security personnel, who in many cases are ex-police or ex-security services, on behalf of the corporations.
Yeah, and what's worse about this, of course, these private security firms, where's the accountability? It's, at least when it's been exposed that the police have carried out this kind of activity, there's some opportunity to get some kind of redress, discipline, sackings, whatever it is. And somebody has to be held accountable and responsible for the decisions that allowed those operations to take place. But what redress is there with private security companies? The only option is the courts. Most people, that is
civil.
It's going to be a civil case. It's going to be too expensive for people to take. But what we seem to be seeing is the privatization of some of the functions of the police and the security services. That is an issue in itself.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know a few years ago that there was I think it was a Green Party, I think he had actually stood as an MP, but he was a Green Party councillor in Kent. And he was shocked to find that the security services had a file on him because he was nothing more than a Green politician. Mm. And as a Green politician, I mean, he wasn't particularly active per se, but the establishment saw him as a Green politician as a threat. Mm. I mean, surely there's something absurd about this.
There's something absurd about anybody that's campaigning on any issue being thought of as a threat. Are we promoting the use of violence? I don't think so. The only thing that we're doing is offering some criticism of what government is doing. Now, why would they be afraid of criticism? What are they doing that they feel that they need to be afraid of criticism? Is it really the role of the police and the security services in a supposedly democratic society to be concerned about criticism? I think there's a bit more going on than seems to be.
Or is it the case that the veneer of this supposed democratic society is just falling apart now, is falling away, and people are actually starting to see this totalitarian corporatist police state for what it is?
Well, that's absolutely right. And of course, the more that falls away and the more people see it for what it is, the more they go in this pretty extreme direction. They've got to, because they've got to try to keep ahead of the game, or at least that's how they seem to perceive it.
Yeah. And in fact, I believe in one of the articles, one of the former police officers who'd been engaged with this said that actually the number of private security personnel infiltrating activist and campaign groups far exceeded the number of actual police.
This is if you go to a fracking protest, a protection camp, or to the gates of a fracking site, what's the proportion of campaigners there to the police that are there? And then you've got
at least those ones are in uniform.
Well, that's true, but you've got to ask: is that the situation with political parties and campaign groups right across the country? Who's actually running these campaigns? Is it people that actually genuinely believe in the issues that they're dealing with, or is it people that are working undercover for the government? It is.
Well, and that's what's interesting about the anti-fracking community, because there's no structure.
Yeah.
And it's much more difficult for the establishment to grasp, and that's something that we collectively have worked hard to sustain. because there are hundreds of different groups, and either the establishment or the private security companies are going to actually have to go on massive recruitment campaigns to be able to infiltrate every single group.
And this is the only way to run a campaign now, is to have hundreds, if not thousands, of individual small groups, because as soon as you start building a national structure, then you're giving them a single point of attack. So I think the fracking campaign has been a great example of the right way to do things.
Well, and it definitely seems to be causing the establishment some headaches, as we'll see. But before we do that, let's have a look at some of the things that these private security companies are monitoring. Now, this photograph here is of Rachel Corrie, who was a young Washington State based activist who was over in Palestine trying to prevent the Israeli military from bulldozing Palestinian homes. And I must confess, I was shocked to realize this was 2003. Wow. That Rachel Corrie was murdered by the Israeli military. But it was Caterpillar. It was Caterpillar who hired a private intelligence firm to spy on Rachel's family, because what they wanted insight into the family legal challenge against Caterpillar, because they were apparently, whether they did or they didn't, I'm not sure, but apparently Caterpillar were concerned that they might mount a challenge about Caterpillar actually sending weaponized bulldozers, effectively, over to Israel for the purpose of domestic terrorism, which was the destruction of legitimate Palestinian property.
Wow.
So that was Rachel Corrie, and but other companies that have been up to this subterfuge: British Airways, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and Porsche are among the large companies that have been identified as having paid corporate intelligence firms to monitor political groups that challenge their businesses, leaked documents reveal. The surveillance included the use of infiltrators to spy on campaigners. The targets include the grieving family of Rachel Corrie, the student protester crushed to death by a bulldozer, as well as a range of environmental campaigns and local campaigners protesting about phone masts. The leaked documents suggest that the use of secretive corporate security firms to gather intelligence about political campaigners has been widespread. However, police chiefs have in the past raised a massive concern that the activities of the corporate firms are barely regulated and completely under control, which is exactly the point that you were just making.
Yeah, you've got to ask the question, what does British Airways have to fear from campaigners? What in particular why do they feel the need to do this? Royal Bank of Scotland, well, there are groups out there campaigning because they were ripping off small businesses and trying to sell them complex financial products as a form of insurance, which ended up seeing a lot of businesses going out of business. So there are campaigns there. Porsche, I'm not aware of any major campaigns there. So what is it within the corporate mindset, I wonder, that's causing companies that you wouldn't expect to be hiring? It can't be costing them a small amount of money to do this.
No, I'm sure.
So you do wonder what the rationale is for these companies.
Well, I mean, there's a certain paranoia here, because obviously, they are concerned that they have some Achilles heel, an exposed underbelly, and they must be extremely concerned that a diligent campaigner will be able to expose that Achilles heel, and of course impact, say, on the share price or on their ability to trade, which will of course in turn have an effect on the share price. So it's all about protecting shareholder value.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as we know, CEOs and senior executives are often somewhat less than honest about situations that they're aware of that would undoubtedly impact on the shareholder value, i.e. the market value of the company.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at another article here. Inside the world of corporate spies who infiltrate protests. The leaked documents suggest that corporate security firms frequently run espionage operations to gather information on protesters, including infiltrating private meetings and obtaining internal documents. However, they are subject to little or no regulation. This has attracted criticism from police who have in the past called the deployment of corporate spies completely uncontrolled and unrestrained. Since 1968, the police have sent more than 140 undercover officers to spy on over 1,000 political groups. However, senior officers have claimed that there have been more corporate spies embedded in protest groups than police officers. In fact, I mean, wouldn't it be absurd if the reality was that there was a protest going and every single person on that protest was either police or private security, because the public really didn't give a damn?
Yeah, I mean, I see a great opportunity for lots of subject access requests here. There must be people that are campaigning on a range of different issues.
Exactly.
That probably feel that they've been on the receiving end of this type of information gathering. So maybe it's time to start on pretty widespread basis making those subject access requests.
Which I think cost a tenner.
They are entitled to charge up to a tenner, and maybe most of these corporate bodies would. But they're certainly obliged to provide anything that they hold on you.
So if anybody's interested in making a subject access request to any particular company, and my counsel would be to do this. In fact, I'm going to make a recommendation that everybody writes to INEOS, Quadrilla, and Barclays Bank, trading as Third Energy, and iGas. So, each one's going to cost you a tenner. So take your pick. But I would suggest that everybody watching this program writes to those companies, asking those companies to reveal what information they have on you, because they are obliged to provide that information. And of course, this will cause them a bit of an administrative headache.
Well, that should be the aim. And of course, we've got to always remember that if they refuse your subject access request, you've got to be willing to take that to the Information Commissioner and take that as far as you can possibly take it. So it's not just a case of writing the letter, and if they refuse, you give up at that point. We got to keep the pressure on.
Well, I think within the anti-fracking community, there's probably enough people who are willing to aid with that process. But I think it's time that these companies started to share how much information they have on each anti-fracking campaigner. And we know they do, because we see the photographs of the regulars up in the security huts. We see the security staff absurdly addressing people by their first name. I mean, it is meant as an intimidatory tactic, and of course the police do the same. It's meant to convey the message that we know who you are.
So private security firms have that as well. I wonder, have they registered under the Data Protection Act to hold that information?
Well, that's another very good question, and I think it's one that is definitely worth asking. I mean, frankly, if INEOS and Third Energy and Quadrilla and iGas aren't putting tails on the activist community, then one would argue they might be being remiss. But you might be tripping over each other as well. But I mean, you know what? You're actually confusing us with a community that cares, because we know, as the anti-fracking community, that we have all of the high ground. And the reason that the unconventional gas industry, and the reason that these corporations, and the reason that the government have to resort to these tactics, is because they know that they are operating effectively without social license, or they're doing something that, if the public became aware of it, would undoubtedly give the public due cause for concern.
But the ironic thing here is that everything that you're doing, everything that I'm doing, everything most people that are campaigning on these issues are doing, they're doing in public, because
Absolutely.
It has to be done in public, because the idea is to raise awareness.
Yep.
So what do they think they're going to find?
Exactly.
So it can be for no other purpose really than to sort of...
It's intimidation.
Intimidate. Yeah.
Intimidation. Yeah, really. So, and of course they have, in fact, let me just go back to this article that I was reading out before, because it says critics say that the security firms are spying on law-abiding campaigners and impeding their democratic rights. The Guardian has spoken to a man who claimed that he had infiltrated political groups for a corporate espionage firm. He declined to give his name or say which groups he'd spied on. He described how the spies surreptitiously fostered conflicts within a campaign to set activists against each other in order to wear them down and make them lose their political motivation. People get tired of it. That's their weakness, he said. Well, you know, I've been sort of subject to some of that, but just shrug it off.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not my concern. There's bigger fish to fry than getting embroiled in BS, petty
Twitter
debate
fights.
and Twitterate. Exactly. But of course, the fracking campaign was seriously targeted. And this is an article from January 2014 by Nafis Ahmed, who used to be based at Sussex University. Anyway, the article, again from The Guardian, are you opposed to fracking? Then you might just be a terrorist. From North America to Europe, the national security apparatus is being bought off by big oil to rout peaceful activism. And the Mail, then, this is from 2015, ran this article, so this is a little over 2 years ago, anti-fracking protesters to be labelled extremists by police thanks to the government terror strategy. Teachers told that campaigners against fracking may be extremists. Now, there's an absurdity here, and of course this was all part of the government's Prevent campaign. But, I mean, it has reached absurd proportions in some areas where, you know, people who have attended anti-fracking protests or just meetings even have subsequently been visited by social services, which again is just pure intimidation.
Yeah. I suppose they're using the excuse that you're creating some kind of emotional harm to your child by protesting or getting involved in a political campaign.
Well, I would argue,
it's
of course,
not even a political campaign after
no,
all.
no, it's not political. It's environmental.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's the thing about the anti-fracking community. There are people from pretty much every political persuasion participating in the campaign, because these are people that have actually looked at what's occurred elsewhere.
But of course, people that are involved in those types of campaigns might be viewed as being free thinking. Maybe this is something that government doesn't want to encourage.
Well, I think you might have hit the nail on the head there. And, you know, I would argue that actually there's a bigger problem with some of the material that the teachers are being instructed to discuss with infant and primary school children, which I would say is doing far more to undermine their social well-being than any parent that is campaigning to maintain fresh water.
Yeah.
Or good quality farmland in the country. Let me take a little piece from that article. It says anti-fracking protesters could be viewed as potential extremists under the government's new counter-terrorism strategy. The police have told teachers. This bizarre advice was offered during a training session as part of the Prevent strategy, which aims to stop youngsters being brainwashed by Islamic extremists. The group of 100 teachers were told that people campaigning against fracking in their local area could be regarded as having extreme views. They were also warned that environmental activists and anti-capitalists could be deemed a threat, with Green MP Caroline Lucas given as an example. I mean, you actually couldn't make this up. I mean, this is more totalitarian than some of the Eastern Bloc countries were during the era of the Cold War.
At least if you were in a Soviet country of some kind, you knew what you were dealing with. North Korea, you know what you're dealing with. China, it's becoming a bit more open, but you know what you're dealing with. Here they have this veneer of respectability and veneer of democracy, and it's just a dictatorship.
Totally. It is a corporate dictatorship.
Absolutely. And
I mean, we know that Theresa May and her government have very little autonomy. They are effectively dictated to by the corporatocracy.
Yeah.
So the good news is that there are people who have actively resisted this label of domestic extremists. And this is Graham Cray and his wife Jackie. Now, Graham is the former Bishop of Maidstone. I believe he was also assistant to the Archbishop of Canterbury when he was based in Kent. His wife, Jackie, is also a reverend, and they actually look after the church at Kirby Misperton. Now, they bought their property in Kirby Misperton, I believe, some 20 plus years ago, but only actually moved back to the village on a permanent basis when Graham retired about 3 to 4 years ago or so. And his comment was, "It's ridiculous. My wife and I are ordained in the church. My anti-fracking colleagues include a senior partner in a GP's practice and a surveyor. We are just people who are concerned about our community and are not afraid to say so. We have the brains to state our case, and we often use cake." He adds, "So many people across the country oppose fracking. Does that make them all terrorists? If we are thought of in this way because we stand up to something like fracking, which the government wants to do, then we are living in a different country than we thought." And in fact, I have to say that the British government is doing us a massive favour, because North Yorkshire is a Tory heartland. It's arguably more conservative, with both a small and a big C, than the southeast of England. And these are people that have never had cause to question the establishment in any way, shape or form. And you know what? They're now scratching away the veneer, and what they're starting to see does not impress them at all.
No, and of course you've got to take this to its logical conclusion, because the more people of this, that are middle class, middle England, I don't like to use the phrase, but you know what I mean. The more of these people that are noticing that this is how our government is behaving, the more people that are calling out the government for behaving in this way. Well, what choice do they have at this point, when the majority of people start to get to appreciate what the reality of the situation is? The government can only go one way. It can only get more extreme. Which then encourages even more people to see through it. Right. So at some point, are they going to decide, well, okay, we've been found out, the game's up, we'll reverse our position? Or are we actually looking at this ending up looking not dissimilar to Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany? Well, I would argue that actually, like you said, at least in Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany, you knew what you're up against, because the state made no secret about its totalitarian clampdown on freedom of thought. Yes, up to a point. But if you remember that in the 1970s, they made this series about the Second World War called The World at War. And if you watch episode 1, they're talking about the rise of Hitler. And they've got an English lady who was married to a German and lived in Germany at the time. And she was talking about the drip of the slow march towards totalitarianism, and people didn't recognize it was coming. And we are like Germany was in 1937 or so now, where an increasing number of people are realizing that, okay, we don't have a figurehead as a dictator, but the government is operating in effectively the same vein. Yeah. Not a great situation. Well, I just want to, we haven't got much time left, so I'm gonna skip the short video that we were going to play. But what we've got, of course, is a move towards the British government effectively trying to establish a corporate police force, and it wants to actually remove British police from the role of corporate policing. And this is a video that's actually up on my YouTube channel. And this is actually Inspector John Hodgen. Now, John Hodgen is actually the head of fraud and economic crime for North Yorkshire. And personally, I think somebody is taking the proverbial urine out of John Hodgen, because here he is facilitating the corporate agenda, yet Third Energy, which is effectively almost a wholly owned subsidiary of Barclays Bank, but they haven't filed their accounts for the second year running. And in fact, by Monday of next week, if Third Energy haven't filed their accounts, then they should be put into dissolution. And this guy should actually be investigating that company, not facilitating the company riding roughshod over the local community, who have all, i.e. all the local councils, all the district councils and all the town councils in Rydale have all voted not to have this process in their community. And here we've got corporate policing. But as we do know, there is a motivation to try and destroy the trust between the police and the local communities in their corporate policing role. And this is a quote from an interdepartmental memo that I was shown a few weeks ago regarding the plan to get Lancashire and North Yorkshire police to deliberately lose the trust of local communities. And the final sentence is indelibly printed on my brain, because it said the objective is to create a motivation for change
which is greater than the motivation to remain with the status quo. And of course, that change is to be able to privatise the policing, as we see here with G4S in Lincolnshire.
Well, look, over the years, I've seen documents with effectively price lists. So that if, for example, a football ground wants the police to help crowd control or whatever, they can hire the police to go and do that. Is there any evidence that the police are being paid to police the fracking sites?
Well, I don't think they are being paid. I mean, I'm sure they are not being paid, and that would be seen very much as a conflict of their interests as well. But the police commissioners are begging for more money to be able to handle this operation. And in fact, the police commissioner, the Police and Crime Commissioner of North Yorkshire, is currently holding consultations with the people of North Yorkshire because she wants them to pay more money towards the policing costs of North Yorkshire. But then they're wasting some, whatever it is, $250,000 or so a month on this policing at Kirkby Misperton.
So the local people are expected to pay for the brutality that they face at the hands of police.
Yeah, for an industry that they don't want in their area anyway.
That's a good business model.
It really is, isn't it? But of course, it's tiptoeing into this. This is from 3 months ago now. Private firms may be given powers to arrest people. And of course, this is initially aimed at G4S and Serco. And the whole idea is just to start by giving them the powers of arrest for people who haven't paid their fines. But, this is just the thin end of a very, very fat wedge. Yeah. Well, Mike, we're out of time, unfortunately. And, this is a massive issue. And, over the last 4 years, we have devoted probably more episodes towards the rampant rise of the corporatist police state in the UK. And I know that more and more people are starting to see it. Even in North Yorkshire, somebody admitted to me a couple of weeks ago that they put their hand up and they said, I'm one of those people, Ian, who had never had cause to question the establishment. And now I'm starting to scratch beneath the surface and I'm appalled by what I see.
Yeah. There isn't a rising awareness, but still there's this concern that people are not becoming aware unless it affects them personally. And somehow we've got to start getting this information out to a broader audience. So we all have to share this, not just the people that are directly affected by it.
Exactly. We're very good at preaching to the choir, as it were.
Yeah.
But it is a massive challenge, and there are some who are challenging it directly. And of course, INEOS are trying to establish a raft of legislation that is trying to establish court rulings that are effectively above existing legislation.
Yes.
By trying to literally put injunctions on any dissent. And this is from the INEOS website, so you get an idea of what they're trying to do. It says, if you, with the unnamed defendants, this is persons unknown, disobey this order, you may be held in contempt of court and may be imprisoned, fined, or have your assets seized. Any other person who knows of this order and does anything which helps or permits the defendants, or any of them, to breach the terms of this order, may also be held to be in contempt of court and may be imprisoned, fined, or have his or her assets seized. So this is the degree to which the corporations are now trying to effectively control how this country effectively behaves and to shut down all dissent. And actually this has been a gift, because what it's done is, again, helped us to show the degree with which this country is slipping into a corporate controlled totalitarian state. And I know that when INEOS actually start operations, and we'll be talking more about this in Fracking Nightmare a little later this evening, but when INEOS start their operations, they are in for one massive shock.
Good.
And, these two gentlemen are on point here. This is Joe Corrie and Joe Boyd, and they are challenging this perverse injunction. And Joe Corrie is funding his own challenge, but Joe Boyd is having to finance his challenge through the crowdfunding campaign. So if you simply punch into your search engine INEOS fracking injunction, crowd justice, or stop the INEOS fracking injunction. You'll come to his campaign, and as of a few minutes ago, he had just broken through the £15,000 marker, which is the halfway point to his target. But the two Joes here are launching a very, very important challenge. And if they are unsuccessful, and if INEOS are able to hold on to this injunction, then what you're going to see in the not too distant future is more of this, working on behalf of the corporations and anybody who has the audacity to challenge a corporate agenda, regardless of what that corporation is likely to do in terms of the ecology, in terms of human health or animal health, then the corporations will absolutely have priority. So here we are at the end of 2017, sadly rushing headlong into the totalitarian corporatist police state. And whilst I'm sure that the vast majority of people watching tonight are actually nodding, going, yep, absolutely, totally agree, we are still, unfortunately, the minority, and it's an even smaller minority that are prepared to challenge it directly.
That's changing, and it's got to change, but it is going to change when people are directly affected by it. But this is the direction we're going in. More and more people are going to be affected by this directly, personally, and they're going to get a wake-up call. Bring it on, is what I say.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as for all of the security personnel, private or otherwise, tasked with monitoring activists, from my perspective, then I hope that you will do everything you possibly can to make sure I get to wherever it is that I need to get to. Because even if I have the most unfortunate accident, which will have nothing, of course, to do with any subterfuge, but if that occurs, then I am relying on the Elvis effect. In other words, every piece of material that I have posted online will all of a sudden get far more interest than it does while I'm sitting here talking with you. So that's my legacy, if you like. So, but of course, that also relies on it not being taken down. So feel free. I don't put any copyright on my material, so feel free, download it, distribute it, do with it what you will. But let's do everything we possibly can to get the word out there, and of course, encourage people to do their own research and come to their own realization. So, Mike, thanks again for all your support over the last 4 years.
Pleasure. Congratulations on 100 episodes. Let's see how quickly we get another 100 done.
Yes, I've got a nasty feeling that we may well be looking at another 100.
Yeah.
Assuming that I remain at liberty.
Indeed. Well, that applies to us all.
Indeed, it does. Thanks for joining us. And following tonight's programme will be a rerun of today's UK column news. And then shortly after 9 o'clock, there'll be tonight's episode of Fracking Nightmare.